No matter how busy you are, no matter how successful you become, no matter how much you try to ignore them, these questions still stand. Who am I? What happens after I die? The question that sits underneath of it all is, does God exist? Because if God exists, then life is not random. If God exists, then your experience is not accidental. If God exists, then what you are trying to do with your life actually does matter. But if God does not exist, then none of it ultimately matters at all. It is not just a religious question, it is the question. Now, math actually proves God in a really cool way. A lot of people will say that everything you see, the universe, life, even ourselves, come from chance. Let's actually take a look at this. Imagine an archer standing at the edge of the universe, about 36 billion light years across. On the opposite side of the end, there's a target the size of a single proton, smaller than an atom. For that arrow to hit the target, it would have to pass through voids larger than galaxy clusters, avoid billions of galaxies, miss every star, slip through every planet system without touching a single grain of dust, without clouds of gas, without being deflected, surviving gravitational pulls from black holes, and maintain a perfectly straight path across the entire cosmos. And then after all of that, if it hits the target, dead center. Now do that again, and again, and again, and again, 1,000,000 times in a row. The probability of this happening is described as 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the 123rd. In other words, it's practically zero. That is not chance. This is design. Now if you go a little bit further, because some people will say, okay, maybe the universe is rare, but life evolves naturally. So let's talk about that. For evolution to work purely by chance, you would need thousands of mutations and adaptations to align perfectly across generations. Imagine everything would have to go right all at the exact same time. Think about something as simple as reproductive systems. If major evolutionary changes happens in one organism but not another, how does it pass it on? How does it survive? It would require mass coordination across populations. And then there's forming singular functional proteins. The probability of this happening by random chance is estimated at 1 in 10 to the 77th power. 1 in 10 to the 77th just for one protein. Not a cell, not an organism. One protein. So when you step back, you have a universe that requires impossible precision, life that requires impossible coordination, biology systems that require impossible complexity. And then we're told this all just happens by chance. Now if you go even a little bit further, the Bible was written by 40 plus authors across 1,500 years and in different places, cultures, and languages. And yet it contains 63,000 overlapping references. That means ideas written centuries apart by completely different people perfectly connect. The probability of this happening is estimated in 1 in 10 to the power of 163,000. That is a 1 followed by 163,000 zeros. That number is so large, it goes beyond comprehension. The number is so large, it is larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe. That is not coincidence, that is not randomness, that is not human ability, that is design. Now let's move from probability to physical evidence, because Christianity is not just philosophical. It makes claims about real events and real places. In eastern Turkey, at Durpanar site, there is a formation that measured around 535 feet long. Now the Bible describes Noah's Ark as 300 cubits, which is roughly 515 feet to 575 feet. That is not a vague description of how long it is, that is the exact alignment. Soil tests from that area show significant higher organic material, significantly higher than the surrounding ground. Ground scans have been interpreted as revealing a boat-shaped structure beneath the surface. And it's located right at Mount Ararat, exactly where the Bible says it would be. Now when you consider Sodom and Gomorrah, near the Dead Sea, two destroyed cities sit roughly 8 miles apart. mass graves, burned cemeteries, and bones warped by extreme heat. And scattered through the region, you got nearly perfect sulfur balls that will ignite instantly. The Bible describes this as fire and brimstone, and well, we found the fire and brimstone directly at Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, when you go to Jesus, Paul the Apostle writes in the first epistle to the Corinthians that over 500 people saw Jesus alive. That's not one, that's not two, but 500. He says many of them were still alive. In other words, he's saying to go ask them. Go ask them if I'm telling the truth. And we don't just have a copy of this message. We have 25,000 manuscripts preserved across centuries, especially in places like Egypt. And what do we find? Consistency. Now, when you go deeper, what is consciousness? Your thoughts, your awareness, your experience being alive. Science can scan your brain, but it cannot explain anything at all. If everything starts with matter, then all you have is more matter. But you're not just matter, you're aware. So the mind must exist at the foundation of reality. Everything begins that has a cause. The universe began, so the universe has a cause. Everything moves from potential to actual. Water can become ice, but it needs something to cause that change. Nothing can actualize itself, so the universe cannot cause itself. If the universe depends on something before it is, nothing ever starts. There must be something already fully actual, a reality that must be the source of power, the source of existence, and the source of order. When you trace everything back, every cause, every law, every mind, you arrive at something beyond the universe, a reality that does not move because it is motion. A reality that does not learn because it's the source of all knowledge. A reality with no limits because it's the source of all power. When you strip the universe down to nothing, and this reality still stands, unshaken, unavoidable, you can call it whatever you want, but what you are describing is God. And if God exists, then the question is no longer, is he real? But the question then becomes, what will you do about him?